Thank you for joining today's special call with Enlivex Therapeutics. With us today, we have Enlivex's Vice Chairman, Dr. Roger Pomerantz, Founder and Executive Chairman, Shai Novik, and CEO, Dr. Oren Hershkovitz. Today, we will be doing a deeper dive into Enlivex's Allocetra, an innovative immunotherapy that is being developed as a next-generation treatment alternative to certain immune-mediated disease indications that have poor treatment alternatives today and that represent multi-billion-dollar commercial opportunities. Before we begin, we need to review the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management, constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical facts should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. Now I will turn the call over to Enlivex's CEO for introductory remarks. Oren, please go ahead.
Thank you, Craig. So, hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. We appreciate your time. We're very excited to have this call with the three of us, together with me, Roger, and Shai. For those of you who are less familiar about Enlivex, just a few words about the company. The company is a cell therapy company developing our platform, Allocetra, which is really a novel modality to treat inflammatory diseases. We take a very different approach from most companies by trying to harness the healing power of those very, very unique and important immune cells and targets indications which are considered as unmet medical conditions with large markets and potential billion-dollar markets with our very unique approach. As you will hopefully get the impression today, we'll see the experience of the management team of Enlivex. We're dual listed and traded on the Nasdaq and TACE, and with several clinical programs and different indication and many milestones ahead of us. We're very happy to be here and share with you our thoughts and strategy and vision for the company.
Thank you, Oren. Dr. Pomerantz, can you provide a layperson's overview of the science behind Allocetra? Specifically, how does reprogramming macrophages contribute to treating conditions such as sepsis and osteoarthritis?
Sure. Thank you, and welcome, everybody. It's good to be here with my friends from Enlivex. I'm probably the junior person here, with Shai and Oren being involved for many years. I actually joined for some of the reasons you're going to hear today. I spent a lot of time in academic medicine studying the cells macrophages and their effects on viruses. And when I saw some of the preliminary data that came out of Enlivex, I said, this is something that I want to get involved in. So let's talk about it in a simple way. And it is able to be described in a simple way because these are off-the-shelf type cell therapies. So what do? They take monocytic cells, mononuclear cells, and what happens is they are taken from anyone, so they're non-matched people to the patient, and they induce a state of apoptosis. What is apoptosis? Well, there's many ways that you can kill cells, but the two major ways are necrosis, where there's a trauma or a poison and the cells die. And then there's apoptosis, which is used by the body from the very beginnings of life. It's actually how embryology takes place in most living cells, most living states. And it's called programmed cell death, meaning there are molecular mechanisms that in time will lead to a state of death, but very different from necrosis. And those cells are used by the body to do a variety of things, again, from developing organs to controlling the immune system. We're interested in controlling the immune system. And what happens in people with inflammatory diseases, whether you're dealing with sepsis or osteoarthritis or ulcerative colitis, what happens is that the immune system is out of regulation. It is hyperimmune in different ways. And what's interesting about apoptotic cells, like I said, is that they can actually calm down the immune system. How do they do this? They do it through a cell called the macrophage. We all have lots of macrophages. They do many things, but one of the things they do is help control the immune system. And also, they are the cells that pick up all the cellular debris. And so they pick up these apoptotic cells that we give to the patients, Allocetra, and they have the eat me call on this. There's a molecular point where it says eat these dead cells. And then there is also a variety of molecular signals that says calm down to the macrophages. So you're really reprogramming the macrophages, which are involved with programming the immune system. So it's fairly simple in that regard. When you give Allocetra, you calm down the macrophages, which calms down a variety of areas of the immune system, both locally and at a distance in the body. And you can therefore have a treatment that can be used in, as I said, inflammatory diseases. You can talk about rheumatoid arthritis. You can talk about lupus. But we're targeting right now osteoarthritis. Affects just about everybody as they get older. I think I have a little of it in my back. And then also sepsis. I've struggled with sepsis throughout my career as an infectious disease physician scientist, and the ability to finally control that with something other than antibiotics and steroids would be a game changer for many patients. I think I'll leave it at that, and we can talk more about this as we move forward.
Thank you, Roger. Shai, you've been integral in shaping the vision of Enlivex over the past 10 years. What inspired the development of Allocetra, and what makes this platform unique compared to other cell therapies in the market?
Well, it's true that what kind of intrigued me initially when I looked at the invention by Professor Mevorach, who from Hadassah Hospital in Israel, who was basically the founder of this scientific platform. I really liked the fact that the concept of utilizing this solution is based on the fundamental way that the immune system works. So everything that Roger just described is essentially, that's the way the human immune system works. Macrophages are involved and they elevate immune activity, and then they relax, and that's kind of how human beings were designed, right, during evolution. And the beauty and the elegance, in my opinion, of the solution that was designed by Professor Mevorach was that he was essentially using the same mechanism that was designed during evolution by nature and just utilizing it to help people get away from being stuck in some undesired state. So this was basically what attracted me. I thought this was really ingenious, and that I would like to spend now it's already 10 years of my career in trying to promote this and bring therapies to people. And you know, the fact that now we're at the stage that we're offering a really high-end solution. Okay, it's a cell therapy, very much high-end. This is not Tylenol. High-end solution that has a lot of positive biological impact on the cascade of prevention of or resolution of inflammation, whether it's low-grade inflammation, high-grade inflammation, all of that with a very elegant production process, very elegant formulation, which is a frozen formulation that can be delivered anywhere, all underlying a very impressive pharmacoeconomic model of having very low cost of goods that can be applicable. So not only that we believe that the product will solve, as Roger mentioned, and Oren, solving problems in segments that today are multi-billion-dollar subsegments, but do it in a way that doesn't cost a lot of money for the patients and for the payers. So this triage of combination of novel solution that can attack the problem at the point of origin, which are the macrophages, something unique that we do. Nobody else does that. And do all of that effectively, safely, and in a cost effective manner. In my opinion, that's going to be, I hate to use the word revolution because, but essentially a real evolution and progression into giving, millions of people proper solutions to problems that today are really just unsolvable.
Thank you, Shai. Dr. Hershkovitz, with Enlivex's robust clinical pipeline, can you walk us through the current status of your clinical trials?
Sure. So we have several clinical programs. Some of them were already mentioned. I'll start with the sepsis, where the phase 2 study, a phase 2 running in sepsis that currently the top line data was announced in April. We're currently following those patients for the whole year in order to generate and accumulate additional safety and potential efficacy data. That will be available Q1 next year. The additional program focused on local administration of Allocetra and on chronic debilitating arthritis indications, mostly in osteoarthritis and additional indication. So we have an end-stage, a study in end-stage osteoarthritis patients that are already indicated for knee replacement surgery. And we offer them Allocetra in lieu of their surgery and follow their safety and efficacy throughout the whole year. We already published interim data from that study. Probably we'll talk about it. The study is ongoing, and we're going to talk about clinical milestones probably ahead of this when we continue this discussion. So that study is ongoing and ongoing well with positive interim data, promising interim data. On top, we have a phase 1/2A study that actually target the major segment of osteoarthritis patients, which means patients with a moderate disease into advanced and severe disease, and those are the large segment that people are trying to treat. This study is a phase 1/2 randomized, blinded, controlled study, running that in several countries in Israel and Europe. Study is ongoing well. It has 2 stages. It has a safety run-in and then a randomized phase 2 part to the study. And we're moving towards the randomized phase of that study, up to 160 patients. It's statistically powered to show significance over placebo. And both of those studies, again, are in osteoarthritis. We have additional 2 programs. One is in a basal thumb osteoarthritis, which is the 3rd most common osteoarthritis joint involved in osteoarthritis. Again, a very debilitating disease. This is, again, a phase 1/2 study, so it has a safety running arm and then a randomized controlled part. We're progressing with the study. We announced the study was initiated this year. We're progressing well with the study as planned. And the additional study, which was just announced a couple of weeks ago, about 2 months ago, is a study where we're evaluating Allocetra this time in psoriatic arthritis. It's a phase 1 study that we're planning to move on into phase 2, assuming the safety and efficacy data are promising as we expect them to be or hope them to be. In this case, we're talking about psoriatic arthritis is a more inflamed, high-grade inflammatory indication, arthritis. But many patients eventually, although they are receiving a systemic treatment, they have resistant joints. And we're planning to exactly target that segment at first. And study was initiated and recruiting. So I guess that's kind of an overview of where we are. As you can see, different stages, more advanced stages, early stages. So we have sizable studies, randomized controlled studies, and I would say a robust pipeline.
Thanks, Oren. Enlivex is targeting multi-billion-dollar markets with Allocetra. Can you elaborate on the commercial potential and the specific market opportunities that you're most excited about?
Well, definitely, as mentioned here during this call, we're talking about several indications which are really multi-billion-dollar markets, just because they are very, very common diseases and indications, and the fact that they're actually all are unmet medical conditions. So if we talk about sepsis, we demonstrate initial potential efficacy in high-grade risk UTI patient, and the estimated size of that market is about $9.8 billion. And if we're talking about osteoarthritis, again, the most common life-debilitating disease, only in the US, there are about more than 30 million people, about 10% of the adult population in the US are suffering from osteoarthritis, and really they don't have today a good, safe, and efficacious solution to their disease. So there's no approved FDA drug to osteoarthritis, and to such a common debilitating disease, it's just insane. We really need to find solution to that treatment and to the core of the disease. And I think this is where we step in with Allocetra, where the mechanism of action with reprogramming those macrophages, which are known to be involved in osteoarthritis and the chronic condition of osteoarthritis. And in that sense, osteoarthritis is expected to grow to about $15 billion market around 2030, and continue to grow over time for various reasons. So you can see that only for those markets that we're talking about, we're really excited about the potential commercialization of Allocetra in those huge markets.
Thanks, Oren. Shai, turning back to you for a moment. You've had an extremely successful history with Prolor Biotech, leading to a significant exit event in which you sold Prolor for $590 million and partnered your lead product to Pfizer. That lead product, Ngenla, has now received marketing approval in 43 countries, including the United States, Europe, and Japan. How do your experiences there influence your strategic approach at Enlivex, and how do you see the company's partnership and collaboration opportunities evolving, similar to what you achieved with Pfizer?
Good question. So first, I want to mention that Oren and several other members of the Enlivex management team were also part of the management team of Prolor, and were integral part for the success of not only creating shareholder value, but also being able to get a partnership with Pfizer and get this amazing drug on the market, helping so many young children have a superior drug to use, and that's really kind of nice that we've accomplished that. I think all of us are very proud of that. But what you don't know is that we've actually at Prolor had prior to the deal with Pfizer, went through very serious diligence with Merck Serono and with Eli Lilly and some others. And so I think the point that I want to make is that the team at Enlivex, not only me, but Oren and a lot of the others, have tremendous experience in understanding and anticipating what large pharma would want from a potential licensing deal or a collaboration deal. And some of the activities that Oren is running right now is looking ahead of the curve. What do we need in CMC to make sure that even when we have very impressive clinical data in one or more of our indications next year, and we want to have these type of discussions with potential partners, we need to understand it now, right? So we need to have a high-grade CMC process, that everything is properly documented and accomplished. We need to have a proper regulatory discussion with the various regulatory agencies. We need to have additional preclinical models with respect to mechanism of action of the drug. So there's a lot of action and activity that investors typically don't see, right? They just see how many patients we've recruited and what was the outcome, which is obviously the most critical. But there's a lot of things behind. So companies that have already experience in doing these type of partnerships spend a lot of effort and time in making sure that the package is complete by the time that they have the clinical data. What that would help, I think, is that once we have the clinical data, and assuming that it's as impressive as at least we believe it will be, we will be immediately in a position to initiate discussions with potential large partners that have a strategic interest in this, rather than at that time have to work for another 2.5 years on trying to bring everything else into a state that large pharma would even bother looking at this. So that's kind of what we do, and we do believe that when we have these type of solutions that Oren described, which are novel, groundbreaking, millions of patients around the world that are unmet medical need that right now have poor treatment, all of this must be marketed by large pharma. This is way beyond, I think, the commercial capabilities of a small company like Enlivex. We do all respect to the team at Enlivex. We are, I think, we excel more in clinical development, regulatory development, CMC development. But in terms of commercial development, I think that, as you indicated, our commercial focus would be to find the right partner to move forward with that. This is exactly what we've done with our former product called Ngenla that Pfizer is now running. And Pfizer, as you know, is the largest endocrinology practice in the business. And I think that my expectation is Pfizer will get to sales of levels of $1 billion to $1.5 billion. That's my personal opinion with Ngenla. And that's something that would have been very difficult for Prolor to do on its own. And I think that that's the lesson that we learned for Enlivex. We will focus on the development and try to find the proper partners.
Thank you, Shai. Dr. Pomerantz, how do you see Allocetra fitting into the broader landscape of immunotherapy and cell therapy? What are the potential synergies with existing therapies?
Sure, thank you. And when you let me explain this again in ways that everyone can understand. When you hear the word synergy, and what does that mean? Well, it really goes with adding drugs together in a way where 1 + 1 = 3. Not 2. 1 + 1 = 2 is an additive drug combination. 1 + 1 = 3 is a synergistic. So everybody, whether you're in autoimmune diseases, whether you're in bacteriology, whether you're in oncology, everyone is looking for a synergistic approach. And that's what makes Allocetra very helpful in leading to that potential for the diseases that Oren and Shai talked about, and many others that they haven't. So when do you think about, as Oren was saying, what do you use for people with sepsis, or the other end of the spectrum, osteoarthritis? Well, you throw old drugs at them. You throw steroids at them. You throw non-steroidal anti-inflammatories at them. If you have sepsis, you also throw standard antibiotics. But you have nothing there that is truly synergistic. What you could get from Allocetra is that you're targeting an area where it not only has an effect on the macrophages, but they have an effect at the local site and throughout the body, so that when you combine them with a different mechanism of action, a synergistic effect, 1 + 1 = 3, is very possible. That is a very hard thing to hit in everything, but this holds the potential for doing just that, not only in the Petri dish, not only in mice, but in humans. So I think that is, again, one of the things that got me very interested in the company. And when you think about sepsis and osteoarthritis, I think that those are only just the tip of the spear of what this drug could do. Being successful there in those two areas opens up large groups of other not well-treated diseases: rheumatoid arthritis, lupus erythematosus, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's. I could go on and on. All of those also are treated with globally immunosuppressing drugs, which lead to other problems. Allocetra is very targeted, and is a reprogramming, not a giant atomic bomb of immunosuppression. And so I think if we can get this drug out to the first group of indications, I think you'll see it spread like you saw monoclonal antibodies spread in different diseases. Think about TNF inhibitors, only without the immunosuppression.
Thank you, Roger. Staying with you for another moment, can you please share with us your thoughts on the experience of working with the Enlivex management team to date?
Yes, it's been terrible. No, listen, I've been lucky enough. Those of you who know me, I've had senior leadership roles in large and small companies. And I've seen what teams work and what teams don't work. And first I got interested, as I always do, in the science, and then you look at the people. Shai and Oren and the board and the teams have been great. They have all the things that I think lead to not just good science, but success in creating value for patients and for the investors. I find them very helpful in understanding where to be passionate and where to make the hard decisions. And that's what you want, both as a scientist as well as an investor. I've been lucky enough to have great teams that have allowed me to lead the development of now 14 approved drugs by the FDA in the US and around the world, but who's counting? And I can tell you that I think that this team reminds me of those teams that have been that successful in bringing drugs to patients and making a very fair value for their investors.
Thank you very much, Roger. Oren, you have been involved in various stages of drug development and have worked together with Pfizer in the late-stage clinical development of Ngenla. What are the critical milestones investors should be watching for in the next 12 to 24 months that will indicate progress and success for Enlivex and Allocetra?
Right. So first of all, thank you, Roger, for the kind words. I appreciate it. Definitely for somebody with the experience that you have in the industry. So that's thank you very much for that. So we have actually, since we have several clinical programs, we were able to build, I think, a pipeline that will generate several milestones throughout the coming, I will say, 2 years, short term and even long term. I'll start with the sepsis, saying that we're following the patient, and as we discussed, we're gonna evaluate the data in the beginning of 2025, and potentially we will be looking for a partner for that indication to lead that forward, as Shai indicated. For the phase 1/2 study, for the phase 2 study in moderate osteoarthritis, that's again a randomized, controlled, a blinded, statistically powered study. We have the safety run-in part of that study, and we have the randomized part. In the safety run-in, we're moving forward with plans, and I think that by the end of the year, we'll have, this is an open label part, we'll have probably data to share. At that time, we'll already be in the randomization phase, and as we indicated before, we will have the top line readout and from that randomized part of the study at Q3 and Q4 next year. So and on top of that, we have the end stage knee osteoarthritis. So again, the patients that are indicated for knee replacement therapy. We already published really positive, promising data, even at that very difficult to treat population. So we're continuing to recruit for that study, and we'll have additional top-line data by the end of this year. And the third study that I want to mention is the basal thumb osteoarthritis. And from that study, again, we have a small safety run-in that we'll probably be able to share data end of this year or Q1 next year. But the top-line data from the randomized part will be by the end of Q2 next year, and additional 6-month data at Q3 25. So I think as you can see, we have several clinical milestones, some with larger, sizable study, randomized controlled study, and some with smaller studies, open label studies. And I think that will provide investors, a very robust program that will help them to evaluate the progress of Allocetra in the coming 2 years.
Staying with you, Oren, Enlivex has a strong cash balance that is expected to support your clinical milestones through the end of 2026. Can you talk more about this cash runway and its correlation with the planned clinical milestones throughout that period?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is a very critical point. We're all aware of the market condition and the biotech being a little bit struggling in the past 1.5 or 2 years. And we been very experienced in managing biotech companies and kind of projecting the hurdles and the risks that are coming ahead. We made various decisions in the past 12 months to kind of reprioritize our plans and make sure that we have an extended cash runway that can take us all the way eventually to the end of 26. And we were very lucky also to open various clinical programs, sizable studies, and enabling and have a cash runway that enables us to cover all of those activities at least by the end of 26. Now, I think Shai mentioned a very, very important point that is less shiny, let's put it this way, from an investor perspective, but it's really critical to have not just the clinical data, but also to have a robust package that includes the manufacturing. He used the word CMC. I'm not sure everybody is familiar with that, so I'll just clarify that CMC means everything that's linked to manufacturing the drug, right, and characterizing the drug, the formulation that you have. Just an example, we moved from a liquid formulation into a frozen formulation into a completely off-the-shelf drug today, generating stability data that will make the commercialization of this drug relatively easy and cost effective. And this is one of the things, I mean, when you talk to big pharma, they start a discussion when you have the clinical data, as we had at Prolor. But the next building block is looking at your manufacturing process, at your cost of goods, at your formulation, at your supply chain, at your mechanism of action, how much you characterize it, toxicology, all of that stuff. And we're doing all these activities now. And since we are well funded now, we're covering all of those projects in parallel to those various clinical milestones that I just described.
Thank you very much, Oren. Staying with you again, Oren, can you also shed some light on Enlivex's strategy for market entry and potential partnerships once Allocetra receives regulatory approval or is in the earlier stages of clinical development? How do you plan to scale up and commercialize this therapy globally?
I think Shai described very well where our expertise lies, and it's in clinical development all the way to the end. We really have, and this is not just the team that is on this call. Our VP Medical and Regulatory Affairs are people that were involved in taking drugs all the way to the end. That being said, commercialization is not where our strengths lies, and therefore our strategy, as was done at Prolor, will be to take this into late stage, advanced stage clinical studies in the different indications, and in parallel to look for potential partners, as we did in the past. I think we know how to do that. We know what they look for, what they're looking for, and that's in general the strategy of Enlivex. Whether it's doing it prior to phase 3, if it's a huge indication like sepsis, or doing it in parallel to moving into phase 3 where we can do that in osteoarthritis, those are like tactics. But in general, I would say that we're looking for a partner that eventually, once we generate that clinical data, then we believe that that will be the case, can maximize the potential of this drug. And we are kind of setting now the foundations to allow this drug to be successful commercially. So not, if we have a deal with a big pharma, then we'll need to start working on generating a supply chain strategy and so on. No, that's what we're doing now as we speak.
Thanks, Oren, and thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insights and vision for Allocetra and Enlivex. We have covered a lot of ground, from scientific innovation to market potential and strategic plans. Now, let's open the floor to questions from our audience. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we'll address as many as time allows. First question: is this curative, or must there be maintenance treatments periodically for life when it comes to osteoarthritis?
Well, that's a great question. I think we're still learning exactly the answer to that question. What we can say is that we had a compassionate treatment in the past where we gave Allocetra, several injections of Allocetra, to really a very difficult condition, an extreme version of osteoarthritis called erosive osteoarthritis or vanishing bone disease. And in that case, we gave that patient was in and out of the hospitals for 4 years, actually 9 months in a row prior to treatment. We gave Allocetra 5 injections, weekly injections, and that patient not just recovered completely, but we've been following her for 3 years and she is still completely healthy. So that's kind of gave us a very good indication that we potentially can see a persistent response. But what we're doing now throughout those clinical studies in osteoarthritis is giving several indications and following those patients for a year. I think that we're expecting to see at least a 1-year persistent response. Whether we will need to have an additional injection, to maintain this as a chronic treatment, to be honest, that still need to be evaluated. I think whether we will or whether we will not, both are potential scenarios, but we are, when we kind of do the pharmacoeconomic evaluation of this, we think that we'll still be very, very competitive regardless of whether we'll need to have once in X time, an additional injection. So that's to be studied, and we'll see.
I want to echo on something that Oren said, is that we also are familiar with a lot of cases that people have osteoarthritis, say, of the knee, and it hurts, and they have really suppressed their physical activity dramatically over the years, and now they're kind of barely moving, and suddenly they get a drug like, say, Allocetra, and it halts the inflammation, and suddenly there is pain levels are very low, and so the first thing they do is they go back to physical exercise, right? So essentially what happens is that a lot of these people, they get their life back, right? So they start running and they start doing this and they start doing that. But by doing that, they're obviously, potentially could be, again, elevating some conditions that may require further injections of Allocetra, even though initially and originally one, say, would have been enough, but now they're so involved and exercise so much. So we do anticipate that once we've completed our clinical development, we'll know more, but that the drug would most typically be administered more than once. Okay, so it really depends on the physical activity schedule of the person. So our best guess would be something like once a quarter, once every 6 months, something like that, for most people that would like to have their active lifestyle back, I would say, something like that.
This leads in nicely with our next question. My mother has severe knee osteoarthritis and sciatica. Can she be involved in trials? She lives in Connecticut.
Well, the simple, first of all, I wish her health, and unfortunately at this stage the studies are being run. We're running the studies in Europe mostly. We are planning, of course, to move into the advanced clinical studies, to move into the US, and at that time, hopefully she feel better at that time. But if she'll still be this will still be relevant, so at that time that will happen. We're going to complete this phase 1/2 study. As I mentioned, the top line data will be end of next year, and the follow-up study, assuming that the data is positive, will go into 2026. and at that stage, it might be relevant.
Can you elaborate more on the manufacturing of Allocetra from pros and cons standpoint?
Sure, I will take that happily. Yeah, so maybe we didn't kind of polish that point, so that's an important question. The manufacturing of Allocetra, and I've been involved in really developing manufacturing processes for many years, is really a simple one. Basically, as mentioned, as Roger mentioned before, we receive from healthy donors, non-matched, non-related, receive mononuclear cells. We take them. It took Professor Mevorach 3 years to develop the process to find the optimal conditions of inducing the apoptosis that we talked about. But eventually, all of those 3 years comes down to less than a day. And we obviously kind of industrialized that process. But all we do is expose the cells to certain conditions, chemical and physical, our know-how, and then we change the formulation, we freeze the cells, and they're ready to be used. So that eventually leads to this very cost-effective drug that we're talking about. We're not doing transfection, we're not propagating the cells, anything of that kind. It makes it very, very, very easy to scale, easy to transfer. We can do this all around the world easily in a very cost-effective manner. We now have, I saw one of the questions about the stability data, so I can, this is also relevant. So we already generated long-term stability of the drug, both in the depot side and in the clinical side, and following, and what we call in-use stability, which means the stability that will support the administration of the drug, whether it's with the orthopedic or in an emergency setting. So we have that data already generated. But I think now that we also moved into local administration, it means that we can generate many drug products from one donor, and the cost of administration will be very much competitive to what's currently out there for treating osteoarthritis, which doesn't necessarily work.
Thank you, Oren. How do Allocetra cells educate native macrophages or dendritic cells?
I think Roger explained that, and we can go into science. I mean, that definitely something I like to do as an immunologist, but I think eventually what happens is once macrophage engulf a dying cell, it processes it. And really downstream to that in various mechanisms, and we cannot go into that, but we're talking about expression of stimulatory molecules. We're talking about secretion of stimulatory cytokines and molecules. We're talking about the inflammasome changes, transcription changes. This is across various mechanisms, and that's important because it's an holistic reprogramming. It's not just targeting a specific receptor or something like that. But eventually, all of that leads to the fact that those macrophages, and rightly so, in some level, dendritic cells as well, are calmed down, and they then doing what they were trained to do through evolutionary, and which is to bring the immune system back into homeostasis, to a stable, normal state. And Roger, Shah, if you want to add something, feel free.
No, I actually wanted to add something to the last question about CMC, to be honest, because, a lot of people don't know this, but in biotech, the most common cause from the FDA of a CRL, a complete response letter, or a clinical hold is CMC. It's not adverse events. It's not efficacy. It's making the drug. And the big surprise from the FDA is always CMC. So I think, as I said before, this team has taken it very seriously that CMC has to be done whistle clean. You cannot get away with things in CMC. You cannot cut corners, and you do that only at your own risk. So I think one of the other strong points is that, and I'm willing to say this, it is unlikely that this company and this team will be caught by the FDA in a catch-22 where you have a drug that you're ready to make and for patients, and you get a CRL or a clinical hold. I think that's very important. Whenever you evaluate a company, I think in biotech, one of the major places to focus is how do they take CMC? How do they care for CMC?
Totally agree. Very good point.
I'll move on to the next question then, gentlemen.
Maybe Roger, you want to take that?
So steroids are an atomic bomb. What happens there, and they've been around for well before I was in medical school, and what they do is they have inhibitory effects throughout the immune system and other side effects. So they can't be given for long term at high levels. For some people, they can't be given at all. And because of that, this is a more targeted approach. You're reprogramming macrophages. You're not firebombing the entire immune system. And that is what will likely give you less immunosuppression. So you don't have to see people like me as an ID doc with various infections that you get as you have a totally inhibited immune system from long-term high-dose steroids. And you'll have this targeted to the place that you need it, which is to reprogram macrophages not to have effects on NK cells and T cells and B cells and dendritic cells in great detail. That's what you want to get out of this. I'd love to see steroids off the market for these drugs. That's the goal. Steroids are not something that you take without real thought. And I think this is what makes this approach a 21st century approach instead of a 19th century approach, which is when steroids were first looked at.
And I'd like to add something to what Roger just stated. We all know that steroids are kind of I'm going to roughly call it first-line treatment. So you have some pain, you have some inflammation in your knee, you go to the orthopedist, and it's like, you know what, I'll inject steroids, okay? And so this has been used, forever. And the reality is that for most people, the problem comes back. 2 months thereafter, problem comes back, maybe even harsher. And again and again and again until those patients, unfortunately, get to knee replacement surgery. So steroids, aside from their harmful side effects, really have not proven themselves to provide a real solution for this particular problem, but only more in the context of temporary relief, which may be, by the way, due to what Roger said, which you can't really do long-term high dosing of that. It's just impossible. But in any case, this is not really a solution. And when Oren stated at the beginning of the introduction that in the case of osteoarthritis, there are really what we call poor treatment alternatives. It's not that there aren't solutions and treatments, but we term them as poor treatment alternatives. They don't really solve the problem. And we think that what we are doing now will change the landscape of treatment of these people. It's going to actually solve the problem without the side effects that some of the others have.
Totally agree, Shai.
Next question, gentlemen. Are the cells lyophilized?
No, the cells are not lyophilized. They're simply frozen cells that are thawed at the site, at the time of injection, at the physician site. They're thawed and directly injected. There's no additional manipulation, by the way, that is pretty common in processing cell therapies and others, but they're not lyophilized. It's frozen.
Next question, gentlemen. Does Allocetra restore cartilage or tissue to repair arthritis?
So what we can say, I think maybe 2 minutes about osteoarthritis pain and cartilage and the relationship between the structural damage and pain before we'll talk about whether Allocetra does repair cartilage or not. What we know about osteoarthritis, this is very, very interesting disease. And there's really a poor correlation here between the pain that since pain is very subjective, between the pain that people are experiencing and the structural damage that they have. So you can see people with an X-ray that suggests that they really have a very advanced osteoarthritis disease, barely have any cartilage, and they're painful, but manageable. And you can see people that comes into the physician and say, I cannot, that's it. I need to have a surgery. I need to have something. I cannot bear this anymore. And when they're doing the X-ray, when they're measuring the structural damage, it's at the beginning of the disease or very early stages. So that's why actually we understand today that osteoarthritis, it's not a simple wear and tear disease that we used to think, which is just cartilage degradation. This is a much more complicated process involving a low-grade inflammation that is being triggered and kind of from the cartilage degradation that goes back to the inflammatory condition and aggravate it, and that leads to further cartilage degradation and so on. And many aspects of the pain comes actually from the inflammatory state of the knee. Now, we don't know, to be honest, whether Allocetra will result in cartilage repair directly. We know that there is a process where the cartilage is actually degraded and rebuilt, in simple words, and we think that we will be involved in that process of changing the microinflammatory environment within the knee that may lead to cartilage to repair or partial repair of the cartilage. It's really depends when we intervene with the process. But I think changing the inflammatory environment within the joint, and we know today that macrophages are pivotal cells that are triggering this disease at the beginning and are actually involved in the chronic stage of the disease. So throughout the development of osteoarthritis, and therefore changing the inflammatory through those macrophages, we think that will eventually lead to a substantial improvement in the condition of those patients.
Thanks, Oren. I see that we are about to hit the top of the hour. Would you gentlemen have time for one more question?
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah.
And participants, we do very much value your questions. Thank you very much. We probably won't be able to get to yours, so what we would like to ask you do is that you take your question and put it in an email and send it to ENLV@redchip.com. That's the ticker symbol ENLV@redchip.com. We will then ensure that the Enlivex team sees your question. And the final question, gentlemen, would be, are you actively seeking partners for the sepsis indication?
Maybe, Shai, you want to reiterate what you said?
Sure. So we're for the sepsis indication, we are continuing to collect the data. Data collection will be done through the end of this year because the last patient was recruited. We need to follow 12 months. All of the data will be analyzed, processed, audited. And with that data, we will reach out to potential partners to gauge their level of interest to continue to work with us, whether it's on a subset of the population, whether on everything. So it's a little too early for us to know, but our strategy is definitely to pursue and gauge interest. Okay, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And again, to our participants, thank you very much for joining us today. And again, that email is enlv@redchip.com. There are a few other ways you can get in touch with us. You can also call us at 1-800-RED-CHIP. That's 1-800-733-2447. And I know someone asked during the webinar, will there be an archived version available? Yes, it will be at redchip.com/events, and then scroll down a bit and you'll see archive. And within an hour or two after the end of this webinar today, you will see the archived version. And that's it. You can
get more information. I'm sorry, get more information. Yeah, one more little thing here. We also have a landing page I neglected to mention, ENLVinfo.com. That's a clearinghouse of information about Enlivex Therapeutics. You can download the investor deck, fact sheet as well, and sign up for news alerts on Enlivex. Again, that's ENLVinfo.com. And now I'm finished, gentlemen. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Greg, thank you for moderating the call, and the Red Chip team, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. Bye-bye.